Okay, so today we're talking about food safety management systems and HACCP. I've been talking about this. HACCP should not be a surprise to anyone. It should not be a new acronym. Hazardous, analysis, critical, control point. This means taking temperatures throughout the production process, working with food throughout the production process, the stages where you record temperatures, you monitor them, you take corrective action, and you document, which means you're filing these documents. The documents are on workstations and cutting board workstations near your area on clipboards. Once these practices are implemented and your staff is trained, it becomes the norm. It becomes automatic. It becomes part of the culture. That's why it's very important from the start you hire a new staff or team member. They go through the process of training, and part of that training is the sanitation training method. Now, you might be the certified ServSafe manager on property, but all employees should go through the food handlers course. The food handlers course you can take through the National Restaurant Association website, or there are regional areas throughout the community that offer the food handlers test. It's like a driver's license. It's a real quick overview of handling food in a kitchen operation. And then your team member will take the exam, and then they get a little food handler's card. This is required in most states, and most states have different methods of how food handler's card is offered, the quiz, the test, the exam. When I taught in Arizona, all students had to have the food handler card before they came on campus. So they would go to the local health department, and they had computers set up just like the driver's DMV motor vehicle. In some states, you go in and you actually take the written test on a computer, and you're monitored by a proctor. So the food handler's card was the same way. In certain states, you have to have that before you can actually work in a kitchen. Now, in the state of Florida, it's not necessarily required that you have to start, but I highly recommend before you have any employees start in a kitchen that they have some food handlers training. Remember, they're handling food and serving guests. It only takes one person to create a hazard within a kitchen or food organization and make people sick, creating an outbreak. So actively control the risk and hazard of food throughout the flow process. So we discussed personal hygiene, constantly washing your hands. If you use gloves, constantly changing the gloves. Wear clean, nice uniforms. Your larger organizations, you have locker rooms where you can't wear your street clothes. You go into the property, you go into the locker room, you put your kitchen uniform in, and then you go into the kitchen. A lot of your big resorts, last week, Las Vegas had the Sunday night football game, and all these resorts were probably very, very busy. All these resorts have a large staff of people, and they have locker rooms, they have employee cafeterias. So they have, some of those resorts have up to 2,000 people working on one resort. So think of the numerous people that are employed at these resorts. So they have professional standards. And many of these resorts, the uniforms are laundered by the laundry and housekeeping. And so when the kitchen team goes into the locker room and they open up their locker, they have clean uniforms every day. And I was very adamant about having this done on the large properties that I worked on, because when you set the parameters of a professional environment, when your staff or your team comes in, they like working there. They know that they're being taken care of. Their uniforms are paid for, the uniforms are laundered, they have a meal when they work. If some of the team members work through the holidays, we made sure they had that theme of the holiday. If it was Thanksgiving, they had a Thanksgiving meal. If it was Easter, they had Easter. If some of our team members celebrated particular holidays. We recognize that based on their ethnicity and their nationality. We made sure we had segments in the employee area where we had to food available for them. So in these areas, it doesn't matter if it's an employee area or a service area on large buffet in a large casino or a resort, always maintaining the HACCP standards, any type of production, when you're serving guests or if they're internal guests or which is your employee. So that's why it's very important that when you have onboarding with new team members or new staff or employees, they go through food safety training. A lot of them, places when they have employees and they're new or you're a small kitchen operation, everybody's checking in food. There's no formal storeroom procedure. So if this is the process and whoever's the closest cook to the door is checking in the food, you better make sure everyone is trained properly on your quality standards. If you're the chef or the kitchen manager or the general manager, what you want to receive, what you want to see what that food looks like, and taking temperatures and recording that. And some of these smaller operations are not formal storerooms, and any cook or person close to the dining or close to the storeroom or the receiving dock is checking food in. That's okay. That could be the norm if it's a small mom and pop restaurant, but make sure everyone's trained on receiving. And if they're not, they shouldn't be receiving food, because that's part of the HACCP strategy. That's where it starts, is at the receiving of the food. You could receive a highly contaminated food product from your vendor and not know it. I gave you a scenario of this week 1 or 2 in New England. One of the large distribution companies, trucking companies, was delivering food to chain restaurants and hotels in the area. They had an outbreak of E. coli. No one knew where it came from, and it was all over the New England area. Major restaurant chains actually closed their doors, filed bankruptcy, and were out of business until they could figure out where this outbreak came from. And they found out that it was Swift independent packer trucks. The trailers were not cleaned thoroughly, and they were taking beef and things that had E. coli, putting it in the trailer, and then putting lettuce and fresh produce in, and the produce was becoming contaminated. And some of these larger establishments that had taco salads and salad bars and things of this nature were getting outbreaks, and no one could figure it out because it wasn't one restaurant. It happened like the domino effect. One restaurant got it, then 2 restaurants, and then one whole restaurant chain, all the restaurants got it. And that restaurant chain actually closed and went bankrupt and never reopened. So that's why whoever is checking the food in the back, if you're a small mom and pop, a little ethnic, little theme type of restaurant, everyone still needs to be trained on what's going through the back door. Follow your HACCP strategy. And that's, then your quality assurance program, that's having a maintenance list in your kitchen. So, you should always have a regular maintenance list, working with your maintenance team or your maintenance engineer, or if you contract out to companies that come in and do your handiwork for you, you should have an regular maintenance schedule. Is the tiles sealed correctly? Are the baseboards sealed correctly? Is refrigeration maintained? Do you have a cleaning or maintaining schedule of the compressors of the refrigeration units? All these things are very important. Your drink and beverage machines, do you have cleaning? Pepsi and Coke will come out and they clean the lines, just like your beer companies. A lot of times you might, if you're a beer drinker and you go out and your beer tastes rancid or flat, the lines need to be cleaned. And some of these very large resorts, these lines go, long ways to deliver to the bar, to the taps. And somewhere along that line, there could be a bacteria outbreak. So lines have to be cleaned. So a lot of establishments don't have maintenance programs. Is your hoods cleaned, right? Even checking electrical outlets and things of that nature. We just recently had a fire in one of the restaurants in Jupiter, all right, and it closed, and they found out it was an electrical outlet. So Maintenance teams need to have regular scheduled checklists of when things are looked at, when they're updated, cleaned, maintained. It's just like your car or your vehicle. You do regular oil changes, you do regular oil engine checks, you do tire rotations, right? Change the windshield fluid, change the wiper blades. Restaurants the same way. You got to go through and look at your equipment. Compressors have to be maintained. Door seals have to be cleaned and repaired. Kitchen sink, valves, plumbing. You spend a lot of money on plumbers when you get into the restaurant industry. And so it's always good to have a contract with a plumber, because valves and seals and leaks on hand sinks and kitchen sinks and 3-compartment sinks, drains back up. So if these are maintained and cleaned on a regular basis, here in Florida, a lot of your restaurants around the country, and they might be on a septic system. And so your septics have to be drained and cleaned and maintained. So these are all part of the maintenance inspection. So you would implement a quality insurance program, which is a maintenance program, meaning you're going through and checking your hoods. Most restaurants have a hood contract. So every so many months, a hood cleaner will come in and they clean your hoods for you. This is very important. I've worked with a lot of owners and a lot of large corporations that would cut this out during budget cuts, and they say, well, we're not making money, we're going to miss this quarter. And they start cutting away hood cleaning and all these major maintenance programs. What happens if your hood backs up? There's a restaurant that I knew in New England that was a very popular restaurant that had a hood fire. There's a restaurant in California that I knew was very popular that had and when I say a hood fire, it's not in the kitchen, it's way up in the ceiling where your exhaust system goes and all the grease from the hood goes up. And what happens, it gets blockage and it's not cleaned, and then it creates a fire in there and you can't get to it. Even the fire team, the firemen, firewomen, they can't get to it. They've got to go up on the roof, knock a hole in the roof, take a saw, cut that sheet metal, and then get down into the fire. By then your kitchen's already gone. And I've seen that happen twice, not in my career, my establishments, but watching the news. And I know what happens is there's budget cuts. They're not making money, because we all know that restaurant industry will work on close margins. And so the first thing is they start looking at some of these detailed little things and saying, well, we don't need this maintenance schedule. We could do this, once a year. The next thing you know, they're losing the restaurant to fire, or there's a major health department comes in and the compressor breaks down on the one of the refrigeration units, or you lose a lot of food due to compressor breaking down and not being maintained. So that's why you need to have a quality insurance program. And you guys are going to see this as managers and supervisors, that people that you work for, they want to take shortcuts because they have such close margins in the restaurant industry. And you have to push back and you have to stand your ground and say, here are the repercussions of what possibly could happen by you making these cuts. So cleaning and sanitation program, what that means is when you're training your team during a busy breakfast, lunch, or dinner service, you're going to have a lot of dishes, pots and pans. So how does that work? Do they run them to the dish machine? Do they take one pan at a time? Do they fill a bus tub and then run the bus tub? You have to have some type of standard practice, and you have to train your staff on that. Some kitchens are so large that the cook's line is quite a distance away from the dish room. And some of your large healthcare, college and universities, business and industry accounts, the dish rooms are not necessarily even near the kitchen. You have to put things in hand trucks and carry them out in some of these very large establishments. So what type of system do you have? Okay, you're all going to hear about SOPs, standard operating procedures. It's a book that you would write as a kitchen manager, a GM, or a chef. And these operating procedures would be known to everyone on your team. They would be trained on them. They may not necessarily get the whole book and be trained on everything in the book, but they'll be trained on their section or their segment. Training is very important. One course I taught at the Art Institute years ago was students had to actually write a training manual that was actually part of one of the courses in operations, and they would use this training manual when they would leave. So it's very important to have a standard operating procedure, and part of that is, ordering, deliveries, sanitation, maintenance schedule, production schedule, all of that is part of that, okay? So, and again, there's your facilities and design equipment program and pest control. You need to have scheduled pest control, especially here in the state of Florida. I do not recommend that you try to do this yourself. A lot of owners in small establishments will say, well, I'll do it myself. It's not done correctly. They don't have the right tests. In Florida, we have palmetto bugs, we got vermins, we've got every type of bug you could think of that could cause contamination in your kitchen. So you sign a contract with a pest company. They'll come in, maintain, clean, check the outside, check the inside. If you have a problem or an outbreak, sometimes you get sugar ants and you just can't get rid of them out of your dining room. Well, that's enough for guests not to come back. And so you work with your pest control company, and they'll help you maintain that. So you want to control the common factors in foodborne. And this again goes back to your HACCP strategy, purchasing from, this is what causes these outbreaks, or, you purchase from an unsafe source, failing to cook food properly, holding food at incorrect temperatures, using cross-contaminating equipment, and practicing poor hygiene. And I will tell all of you that I have taken over hotels that were very well-known, popular hotels, and gone in the kitchen. And after I walked through the kitchens, I myself would not eat in the establishments. So the first thing I had to do is implement training programs, make sure people had clean uniforms, make sure people change their uniforms. You don't wear the same chef coat day in and day out and pull it out of the backseat of your car and it's soiled, and you have to use an iron. And it sticks in my mind, one of my first jobs as an executive chef I took over, and the executive sous chef of that property, his chef coat was dirty. Didn't wear an apron. He walked around, he constantly wiped his hands on his chef coat. It was disgusting. When someone comes into your kitchen, you all know now the big concept is to have a chef's table inside a kitchen. You see this on the Food Network. They set up a table in the kitchen and you win a prize, or you get the guest of the week, or you're invited by the chef and you sit right in the kitchen and watch the kitchen crew preparing meals. Well, every time you clean your kitchen or your appearance, think of someone having a guest in your kitchen or doing one of these guest chef tables in your kitchen. You want your staff clean. You want your kitchen clean. You're not going to invite someone in your home and your kitchen is filthy. Think of your kitchen as a professional kitchen and a professional chef the same way. When they walk in, you want your team to look professional. And that's why we're teaching you from day one that you're in professional uniforms, comb meat caps, you look professional. So manager controls, which we've been talking about every week, training, training, training. Supervision. When you train someone, are you evaluating on a regular basis and are you following up? One of the biggest mistakes that supervisors make is they put people through training, they implement it, they spend all this time, money on sending them out to go to take classes, to learn things. There's no evaluation and follow-up when they come on the property. Are you observing them? Are you coaching them? An annual review basically doesn't help at all. I constantly call people in my office and coach them or talk with them when I'm in the industry and when I'm working. I was not for the annual review because all this builds up in 1 year and then you're just delivering a 1 year performance on an individual. That doesn't help that person. You got to coach them all along. So if there's a problem in sanitation and working in their station, I'm going to call them in at the end of the shift and point it out right away. If there's a problem with tardiness, the second time I'm calling in and say, hey, is there anything that I can help you to do to get in on time? You remember the story I told you guys in the cooking lab where I had Maria, the breakfast cook, where she came in at 3:30, 4 o'clock every morning on a regular basis. She showed up. I didn't have to worry about coming in, but she had a problem with the servers. She would beat up on the servers, verbally abuse them, calling them names, making their plates hot. This is for breakfast. In a large hotel, and this was a corporate hotel, which means this is all business and industry executives in the inner city. So you're running a 95% occupancy rate, which means your breakfast count is about 80%. So we were full every breakfast, every morning, except for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, because it was a conference hotel. No conferences usually, no business and industry executives on weekends. So Maria would make those plates hot and she would curse servers out because they weren't picking up on time. But when I came in as the executive chef, she was sweet as pie. She would come in and be the nicest person. She'd have, back then, we read the newspaper. She'd have a newspaper on my desk, a cup of coffee, a bagel, or sometimes she'd make me an omelet, sweet as could be, like nothing was going on. But the servers started coming to me and saying, "Chef, we got a problem," and they would go through it. So I would talk with, I had the head server and she'd say, "Yeah, this is a problem." So over a couple of years period of time, I tried to coach Maria and go through things, but eventually I had to cut Maria loose. And I told you this story before. I couldn't find anybody to come in at 3:30 in the morning. So naturally I had to be the one to come in until I could find a cook. And then when I found a cook, they would not come in consistently on time. So training is very important, and getting to know your staff and your team is very important, and evaluating at that time. Don't put people through a training program, sanitation, setting up a station, HACCP principles, and then don't follow up and evaluate. One of the biggest parts and one of the steps of HACCP is evaluating, following up. And if something is wrong, like you see a cook leave a soup out and you go take a temperature and it's 70 degrees in the middle, so it's in the log phase where it's just growing bacteria, you want to take that and dump it out right there, right then and there. You're not going to wait for a year annual review and tell them, you're going to dump it out. It's your protecting your guest and your customer. You say, "Do not serve this." That's corrective action. And managers don't do that. How many of you work with managers that just sit in the desk and they don't go out on the line? Well, I was known as working the line. If I saw my expediter was in the weeds and they couldn't get the food over, I'd put the expediter in the middle of the cook's line and I would expedite and get the food out. I had one chef that I hired, it was a sous chef that couldn't get 70 plates out of a restaurant, and we were doing 450 at lunch. So standard SOPs, you're gonna hear all that acronym throughout your industry, throughout your career. Standard operating procedures, what are they? So monitor critical activities in operation. And I'm an operations person. I don't sit in the office. I'm up and about. Sometimes I have to pull back because cooks get intimidated being the executive chef, thinking I'm working the line because they're not doing a good job, or I'm over cutting and chopping where they think they're not doing a good job. And it's not like that. I just like to be a hands-on person. So be active, know your staff, know your team, be visible, be on the floor. Watch what's going on. If you watch what's going on, you're going to alleviate a lot of these issues with sanitation, cooking methods, cooking food properly, storing food. I'd walk through the cooler. Believe me, people want to put their hours in, they want to go home. I'm okay with that as long as they're doing their job correctly. A lot of times, line cooks will not cool the food down properly. As I told you, they'll take soups and sauces off the line and they're in the inserts. They'll just throw them right in the cooler without chilling them down. And then they won't do FIFO, first in, first out. They just throw things in. So there are many times when I go in the cooler and I clean it out, and they're going to see me, I'm carrying things out and taking stuff out and dumping it. And I'm showing it to them. I'm taking it to the line and say, look at the date. Look how long this has been in here, how this hasn't been cleaned out. And I told you the story in the lab where I became famous for one of my restaurants in the hotel. It's called Images Restaurant. It was a 4-star, 4-diamond restaurant. And I would call down and tell the chef de partie, the restaurant chef, and say, I'm going to come in and work the line tonight. It was a Friday night. And that night we'd be very busy. And I'd go down and walk through because this restaurant was in the banquet kitchen in the front of it. And I'd walk through and I'd look, I'd see all my line cooks screwing around getting their stations set up because they knew that they were doing part of what they were supposed to be doing as far as setting their stations up and just running around and grabbing things as they needed. They knew if I came down and work the line, that their station better be set up. And I'd come in and they're scurrying around, making sure the old sauces are thrown out, cleaning out their boxes, setting the line up because they knew I was coming down to work. And I did that intentionally. An executive chef, I had 1,000 cooks and chefs. I had an executive sous chef. My banquet chefs, I had like 20 banquet chefs. So when I went down to do that, there's a reason why I did that. I didn't want them to think I was some executive chef just sitting in an office doing paperwork and they didn't know who I was. And when I went out and worked the line, I was right on the line. And I didn't take the line cook's position. I worked right beside that individual on the line. And we do some chef specials and I'd teach them some things and they loved it. And I got the reputation of being hands-on. But I also did that for a reason because it allows me to see who's doing what, who's maintaining their sanitation standards, who's setting their boxes up, who's rotating their food. If I'm sitting in the office, I don't know this, and I'm just going by trust. And you don't want to put your whole career in someone else's hands because all it takes is one person to have an outbreak, especially in a very large resort or an establishment where you're cooking a lot of food, and a lot of food is leaving from banquets and many restaurants. Here in Palm Beach County, a lot of your large resorts, Ibis, Boca Hotel and Club, Breakers Hotel, they have more than one restaurant. So you as an executive chef are managing restaurant chefs, chef de partie, which are station chefs, and watching their production. You can't watch it from afar or from an office. You got to be in there, and you have to maintain your standard of management control. Like if you go into a restaurant, you go right to the restaurant chef or the chef de cuisine, and you get that reputation. And I had a lot of cooks that were high volume cooks that were great in banquets, but they couldn't work in a fine dining restaurant. And the fine dining restaurants couldn't work in banquets because they weren't high production people. So you align the correct people in the correct environment, but you have to follow up, manage, supervise, walk through the walk-in coolers, open up the refrigeration units. You can tell right away if they're rotating things, if they're label and dating things, if their food is fresh. Okay, they're taking shortcut. And all this goes back to the HACCP standards, whether you're a small mom and pop or you're running a formal dining room, formal storeroom in a major hotel operation. So monitor the critical activities in the operation. You cannot monitor them from sitting in a chair and a desk. Take the necessary corrective action. Well, instead of me going down and yelling and screaming, the chef that I took over from was a very reputable chef as far as his reputation, but he was a hothead. And back then we had intercom phone systems. So you'd pick up a phone and they'd go to all the different kitchens in the main chef's office. Now we just use our cell phones. Well, he got known for taking the phone handle and he'd slam the phone. So every time he'd go to use a phone in the kitchen, it didn't work because the executive chef busted the phone. Well, the problem was he wasn't going down in the kitchens and working with the teams and monitoring what was going on. He sat in his office, came in late, came in whatever he wanted, so he didn't know what was going on. So he couldn't take corrective action because he was troubleshooting. In other words, something already bad happened and then he had to fix it. And then he'd get mad at his staff and his team because they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. But if you're out of sight, out of mind, and you're not visible, no one's going to fear you or be afraid when you come through. So there's a purpose why I would call down and say, hey, I'd call on a Thursday afternoon, and I'll say, I'm going to be coming down to Image's restaurant and work on the line with you guys Friday night. And that's because that was fine dining. In your hotel, you have many different outlets and venues, but your fine dining restaurant is really what gets your reputation as a chef and what people want to know. Believe it or not, most people want to know who the executive chef is, not the general manager. And the general manager is important because they take care of finance, rooms division, revenue management, etc. I'm just saying that because people come to your facility to use go to the restaurants, go to the bars, go to the pool. They want to know what that hotel has. So they want to know who is the executive chef and what style of food you have. And that's just the norm of the industry. So when I went down to these restaurants to work in the operation, it's so I was visible. And if they see you right on the line, and I was doing specials, but I wasn't doing these easy specials. I was doing beautiful things. And I will honestly tell you, the maitre d's loved when I came down because their tips went up, their sales went up. It got to a point where people would call in on a Friday night and Saturday night and say, hey, is Chef Laird working the line tonight? What are the specials? And my cooks knew it. And I didn't do it every Friday. I did it like maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. So they knew that they better have their station set up and their lines done. That's taking the necessary action, being visible and correcting these things as you're working in the operation. So an annual review would not have done anybody any good in these circumstances. You're already going through a year's worth of events and menus and meals. So you have to be correcting on a regular basis. You have to be meeting with people and coaching them. Sometimes you have to write up a training plan. And, you know, as we call it, a coaching session. You write down a plan to help someone improve their job skills. And you make deadlines and make sure they make those deadlines on those job skills. All right, so we've talked about the HACCP strategy, and I can't stress that enough on how you need to study this, know this, understand it. Very important for your, here are the 7 steps, these are the principles. And as I told you, when you go to take your ServSafe certification exam, they're not going to say, you know, A, B, C, D, these are the HACCP steps. They're going to give you a scenario, and the scenario is going to be a situation. And in that situation, you have to say which step it is. So for example, you might have a cook that's not taking temperatures on the line, and you are going to evaluate or follow up, and you learn that the cook is not, there's no established monitored procedures. Or you might come in and see that storeroom is receiving product and no temperatures are being taken. So that's the first stage. So know these, but don't know them just as far as memorizing them. Know scenarios in your studies. When you read the case studies, understand these scenarios. And it's not just for the ServSafe National Manager's Exam. It's helping you as a manager to know the flow of food in a kitchen and alleviate these outbreaks of foodborne illness. And it goes back to your vendor. Okay, we just had another recall on lettuce. You guys have seen that on the news, right? A month ago, it was Italian meats, and now it's lettuces. So you have to be up on this as a food purchasing agent, a chef, a kitchen manager. You've got to know where your source of food is coming from and how you're handling it. So these are the principles. I've been talking about these every week, okay? So I'm not going to lecture by step. You have the slides. We've talked about it every week. This is very important. This chapter 8, you have to know this section inside and out. Study these, know these. They're going to create scenarios on the exam, but these are also the same scenarios that you have in a daily event in your establishments. Okay.